This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include Chris Fitzsimon from NC Policy Watch, former chairman of the State Board of Education and former high muckety-mucking state government Phil Kirk, former Lieutenant Governor Dennis Wicker, and current Becki Gray with the John Locke Foundation. Well, we've got an interesting show for you this week. And by the way, Becki is subbing for John, who is away this week. We've got an interesting show for you this week. In 2013, our legislature passed tax reforms, and we want to discuss how well they're working. We also want to take a closer look at the bond referendum we're going to be asked to vote on in March. And we'll talk about a federal judge refusing to block voter ID requirements in the upcoming primaries. Let's get started. Beginning in 2013, our legislature enacted the first phase of tax reform that essentially cut income tax rates for upper income earners and corporations. It was followed last year with further tax cuts and the implementation of sales taxes on many items. Reformers said it would expand the tax base and ignite growth, but opponents said it was going to slow down revenues to our state. How well is it working? Well, the Tax Foundation, based in Washington, ranked state tax policies and reported that our state jumped from the 44th to the 13th in the nation. Becki Gray, the state controller, recently reported that in the first 6 months of our fiscal year, revenues increased by almost $600 million and exceed revenue projections by more than $100 million. You were a big supporter of these tax reforms. Does this indicate that they are working?
Absolutely, and let me just mention too that it's not only the tax reforms, but it's also rolling back regulations. It's putting an emphasis on accountability in education, ensuring that we have a well-skilled workforce, investing in infrastructure, scaling back the size and scope of government. So all of these reforms together, and tax reform certainly was a huge part of that, has in fact worked. Let me just throw out one number for you. 234,000 net new jobs in North Carolina. You mentioned the additional revenue that's coming in, but I think that says a lot. Other indicators that we see with growth in GDP, per capita income, unemployment rates, all of those things. North Carolina is a leader not only in the nation, but not only in our region, but also in the nation. We've become a model across North Carolina about how to do these reforms and how to do them right.
Dennis, you served in the legislature for many years and have been following all of this. A lot of people say we really didn't reform taxes in North Carolina. We just shifted from income tax base for corporations and individuals to sales taxes. Is that a valid suggestion?
Well, I do think for purposes of economic development, when you cut the corporate income tax and some of the other business taxes, that it does help in recruiting of jobs and that kind of thing. And it does play into a lot of other areas like the skilled workforce and how your public schools are doing and the universities and all those things we know about. But I do think that the concern that we should have is where are they making up these taxes? And the shift is being put and the burden is being put more on lower income and moderate income citizens in this state. And I think that's something we need to really hold in check and watch, because we do need to have a balance, I think, in our tax policy as we go forward.
So we go from 44th, for Phil, to 16th with a projection that it's going to go to 13th. What does that tell you? What's the takeaway here?
I think it highlights the primary difference between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. I think the Republican Party that is controlled in a number of states have moved away from almost total reliance on the income tax and put more of it on the sales tax. I agree we can go too far on any of this, and I don't think we have. And I hope they'll cut more.
Well, according to what we've heard from Senator Bob Rucho in his concluding days in the legislature, he wants even more reform in 2016. Any idea what that might include, Chris?
Well, I think he wants to eliminate the corporate income tax. I think Lieutenant Governor Dan Forrest wants to, and others, and Rucho, I think, has his ultimate goal, although he won't be in the legislature when it happens, to ultimately completely eliminate the state income tax, which I think would be a dramatic mistake. That would make the shift really huge towards sales tax that hit moderate and low-income families. There are plenty of states in the country that are also doing very well, that haven't made all these tax cuts, that have made big investments, where North Carolina is part of a national economy, an uneven recovery. There's still plenty of places in North Carolina that are struggling. And remember, the revenue projections right now are $100 million over what we expected. We'll see what happens at the end of the year. But we did all that, remember, by not giving all teachers a raise, by cutting a lot of places in North Carolina that need some more investment. So it's not all.
Well, that didn't have anything to do with the amount of money that came in. It had to do
but
with how much we allocated.
My point is that we chose to cut. We chose to cut taxes instead of give all teachers a pay raise, for example.
Okay.
Well, all teachers got a pay raise during
No,
this.
they
During the 2013, during the 4 years,
Not all
they
teachers,
certainly
no,
have.
they did.
But
They
Tom, I think
absolutely
it's
did.
important too to note that as far as low-income families are concerned, and they have been helped with this. You may recall that actually this whole reform thing started in 2011 with changes to the sales tax rate, and so everybody
When they
received
let
a
the sales
benefit
tax
there.
the temporary tax expire.
Yes.
So letting the tax expire
sales
was
tax went down in
and they
2011,
also eliminated
which
the state earned income tax credit.
And
that
at
helped
the
low and
same
poor-income
time, though,
families.
Chris, what they've done, and they do continue to do even more with this, is they have increased the zero tax bracket. So more people are helped. Everybody's helped.
But
Nobody gets special
millionaires have gotten
treatment.
an $1,800 break, and the very poor, bottom 20% are paying
Well,
slightly
let's
higher
talk about
taxes.
that. Is that unfair? I mean,
We're shifting the tax burden. Poor people are paying more taxes than they
Okay.
used to. Rich people are paying less taxes than they used to.
Dennis, I mean, you've
That's
been up and down this
economic
ladder many
development.
years. Is that unfair? Is that fair that wealthier people ought to pay a higher percentage of tax? That's the way it has traditionally been.
Well, look, yes, that's right. But what we need to do is to make sure that it's not getting out of whack. I mean, when you have all these tax cuts, and listen, anybody that holds public office loves tax cuts because they're so popular with people. But at what
Of
cost?
course it is.
Well, wait a minute. But at what cost? And I think what we got to do is to make sure that we don't go too far, as you said, Phil, about the lower income and moderate income people getting a bigger percentage of share paying taxes of their income. That's what this is about.
Well, another thing that this report showed, which I found very interesting, is that disposable income, the income after taxes in North Carolina, there's always been a gap in North Carolina between us and the national average. We've always been below the national average. That gap began to close in the 1990s, and now it's widening again. North Carolina's average income is, after-tax income is $35,000. The national average is $40,000. How can we explain that growing gap there?
That's a good
That's the
question.
first time I've heard this panel with no comments in 18 years.
Well, one of the ways is that a lot of people that used to make a lot more money in a job are now taking a part-time job. They're no longer getting unemployment. A lot of, I mean, I think that we have created jobs. Not all of those have been good jobs. We still have a lot of people in our rural communities who aren't working, who are now going to be cut off food stamps. So, I mean, everything is not rosy everywhere in North Carolina.
Well, and I think to Chris's point, it's not finished. You mentioned that Senator Riccio has talked about additional things he wants to do in 2016. The rest of the General Assembly has talked about continuing to do this.
He wants to broaden more sales taxes, which is some of the most politically difficult.
Of course it is. Of course it is. But, the whole goal of this was to create jobs, to get North Carolina's economy moving,
All right,
to put more money into the economy to create a vibrant, robust economy.
I got a final question here because we got in this segment.
This hadn't been boring.
No, it hasn't been boring. The final question here is the stock markets have been taking a beating ever since the beginning of this year. What is that going to do? I mean, we had a 500-point drop one day this past week. It came up at the closing, but what's that going to do to North Carolina's economy?
It's going to have an impact on North Carolina's economy, and I think...
Is it going to slow this down?
Well, yes, I think it's got the potential of slowing it down, and I think the first half of the year will be a slowing down. But here's the thing: if you're going to take credit for North Carolina's jobs being tax cuts, then when we do have a downturn, and the tax revenues are way under budget, what are we going to do? And that's the part I'm trying to get across: is that we need to be careful about how we do this and don't do it recklessly.
And you are absolutely right. And the General Assembly took measures to put money into savings accounts and to put that money aside so that in case there is a recession, in case we do have a downturn in the economy that would result in less revenue, that there is some cushion there to go against that.
We'll keep
so
this
you don't
conversation
have to raise
going off camera, but we thank you for watching NC Spin on the air or on YouTube. Here's a reminder, there's much more on our website, ncspin.com or ncspin on Facebook. You'll find video footage that's not seen anywhere else, perspective pieces from our panel, and my weekly column. So get more balanced debate from the Old North State at ncspin.com, ncspin on Facebook, or on Twitter at ncspintweets. After these messages, we're going to talk about the bonds.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
I still believe in the Constitution. That's why I back Buck.
I believe in the Second Amendment. That's why I back Buck.
I want someone who puts North Carolina first. That's why I back Buck.
In the upcoming Republican primary, back Buck. Buck Newton for Attorney General.
How can North Carolina prepare today to create enough good jobs tomorrow? Join business, policy, and education leaders at the 31st Annual Emerging Issues Forum, Future Work for Answers. February 8th and 9th in Raleigh. Help drive the future of work by registering today at emergingissues.org.
Let's prepare our state for the future by supporting the Connect NC bond. The bond will fund smart investments in education, agriculture, state parks, our National Guard, and infrastructure projects, creating job opportunities, strengthening our workforce, and driving innovation. It's a timely investment and a smart one for North Carolina families. On March 15th, stand with Farm Bureau and vote for the Connect NC bond.
Hey everyone, I'm Linda Loveland. If feeding your family safe, affordable foods is a priority for you, then join me in saying thanks to the North Carolina farmers who feed us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's say thanks to the farmers who feed your family at #ThankNCFarmers. To learn more about the foods we eat and the farm families who feed us, visit feedthedialoguenc.com. And be sure to thank North Carolina farmers.
We now return to NC Spin.
Several weeks ago, we devoted an entire show to the upcoming elections on March 15th, but we haven't talked much about the $2 billion Connect NC bond referendum that's going to be part of that vote. Most bond votes are held during November elections, and bond organizers only had about 3 months to make the public aware of this capital campaign that's going to allocate $980 million to public universities, $350 million to community colleges, $179 million to agriculture, $87.5 million to the National Guard and Public Safety, $309 million to water and sewer loans and grants, and $100 million to state parks and attractions. Phil Kirk, you've headed state bond campaigns before. How big a handicap do the bond organizers and supporters have in trying to make the public aware of this campaign? And why did the legislature decide to put it on the March ballot instead of November?
Well, I'm not smart enough to know why they did it. I've got some guesses, but it should have been on last November. That's when it should have been on. That's when the governor wanted it on, so the jobs could be created and the work could be started, and it also wouldn't hurt his reelection campaign. However, the legislature, for one reason or another, I'm glad they didn't put it off till November, because interest rates have started going up, and we need to go ahead and get the jobs created. But I am concerned about it passing.
It's going to be confusing.
A lack of education, and I'm also concerned that the voter turnout in the Republican presidential primary could have a very heavy anti-tax, anti-borrow, anti-government, and those people are going to vote against the bond package.
Chris, one of the aspects of this bond package that has gotten virtually no press whatsoever is the $309 million for water and sewer loans and grants. The Department of Environmental Quality recently reported to a legislative committee that 92 out of the state's 131 public water systems would receive a do not drink warning based on the state's water standards. Is this something North Carolina needs to be aware of?
Absolutely, and it's interesting to me that we have all but eliminated the Clean Water Management Trust Fund that was started several years ago that, among other things, helped local governments replace their water and sewer systems or figure out how to replace them. I think it's good to have that. I wish that we had more in the bond for local water and sewer, but that's not a sexy thing to sell on the campaign trail. If this is about getting it passed, it's much better to talk about colleges and universities and state parks and things that everybody sort of is much more aware of. We sort of take our water for granted, unfortunately. I think that's part of the problem. I think Phil is right about the Republican primary. The worst case scenario for the bond is if the Democratic race is over and Hillary Clinton is a presumptive nominee, and that Ted Cruz and Donald Trump are battling it out, because most of their base constituency probably will not be inclined to vote for it. So I think that's the danger that folks are worried about.
I don't want to get away from this water issue, because the needs have been listed, Becki, at $16 billion in North Carolina. Those are just current needs. Local communities, local water systems have $8 billion in debt already. They're maxed out. Without this matching grants and loans from the Department of Environmental Quality, we face some serious threats for clean water in North Carolina, don't we?
Yeah, I actually think this is probably the most interesting thing in the bond, to be honest with you. Raises some questions. You know, one is, this has always been a local government responsibility. So should a statewide bond, should we borrow money for this kind of program? Well, the argument could certainly be made that a lot of those water systems are actually regional water systems. And so it goes beyond just the local government responsibility. And like you said, a lot of these needs, the local governments are not going to be able to pay for it. The other thing that I like about this is, as you mentioned, it's a loan and grant program. So the money is set up. The local governments will borrow money to meet these needs. They'll pay that back. So this is a fund that's being set up that will go on forever. And a lot of these needs, these water systems were put into place 50 years ago with a 50-year lifespan.
Well, and Dennis, it's been since 1998 that we had any kind of referendum on passing water bonds. We were talking about the Clean Water Act. 1998, that was $800 million. This is only $309 million. My question is this: what happens to our water and sewer needs if we don't pass these bonds?
They're going to continue to deteriorate, and it's going to be bad. You know, it's the bloodline to every community in this state. And if we don't get on top of this particular part of our infrastructure, Tom, we're going to see a lot of cities possibly even going bankrupt trying to get this stuff put back into order and the good quality of water that we need to have. It is one of the, I think, the heartbeats of issues coming up in the next 10 years.
The citizens of Flint, Michigan can tell you how important this is, can't it, Phil?
Yeah, people don't like to talk about it, and I'm not running for anything, so I can say it. Property taxes in North Carolina are generally low. Nobody believes that. I mean, no taxpayer believes it. And county commissioners, city council are hesitant to raise property taxes, but they can raise property taxes and pay for some of this. It's been a local, as Becki said, it's been a local concern. I think it should be a partnership. I think the state, particularly for the poor areas. I don't have much sympathy for some of the cities and counties that have their tax rates so low. But I'm really concerned about the rural communities.
But you mentioned that there's some undercurrents of opposition to this. People on the far right, are as Chris was alluding, are saying, no way, Jose, no borrowing money. People on the far left are associating this with Pat McCrory, and they don't want to do anything to help Pat McCrory get reelected.
That's why it should have. It's a moot point now, but it should have been done last November, not now.
One of the most significant things I think we all need to remember is, for the first time since 2000, we get to vote on this, and I think that's significant. It's not that North Carolina hasn't borrowed money in all those years; they have. It's just we, the voters, didn't have an opportunity to. So I think that's a significant part of this.
After these messages, we're going to talk about the voter ID law that was upheld by the March primaries, upheld for the March primaries.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
I still believe in the Constitution. That's why I back Buck.
I believe in the Second Amendment. That's why I back Buck.
I want someone who puts North Carolina first. That's why I back Buck.
In the upcoming Republican primary, back Buck. Buck Newton for Attorney General.
Jobs are disappearing, our population is getting older, and big disruptions lie ahead. How can North Carolina prepare today to create enough good jobs tomorrow? Find solutions at the 31st Annual Emerging Issues Forum, Future Work, February 8th and 9th in Raleigh. Register now at emergingissues.org.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception, keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
It's a fact. Patients who receive care in the medical home from a trusted family physician reduce healthcare costs through prevention, early detection, and affordable management of high-cost chronic diseases.
Every dollar invested in healthcare matters. Let's invest them wisely, building on North Carolina's medical home model. Better health begins with a medical home, a trusted family physician, the best return on our healthcare investment. Learn about the importance of medical homes at ournchealthcare.com.
You sleep on concrete till your body get immune to concrete.
My mom got my brother and I up and said, come on, we're leaving.
I became homeless in the beginning of this year.
When I was about 4 or 5 years old, our house caught fire.
I used to see my brother. If he see me, he'd turn and go the other direction.
We did the only thing that we could think of, and we went to a Salvation Army shelter.
You know, we don't have this, like, what's your background look like? We just say, what do you need?
I remember the man from the Salvation Army coming down with a box of clothes.
The Salvation Army officer bought my brother and I an ice cream cone.
Last week, my brother walked up to me, and he just started a conversation.
Today I've given my life to the Salvation Army because I remember what somebody did for me, my brother, and my mom over 30 years ago.
The Salvation Army for me means hope.
Compassion.
Family.
Support.
We now return to NC Spin.
Several lawsuits resulted from election law changes made by our legislature. The state NAACP and other organizations had asked U.S. District Judge Thomas Schroeder to postpone the requirement for voters to show an ID at the polls, but Schroeder recently ruled the ID law would stand at least until he makes a final ruling. In that ruling, he suggested that halting the ID requirement could cause more confusion than allowing it to continue. Dennis, the 2015 session of the legislature further modified the ID requirement, saying voters could avoid presenting an ID at the polls if they could demonstrate they had a reasonable impediment to obtaining identification. You've been following this for a while. What do you think of Schroeder's ruling?
Well, I thought about it a long time, and I read through it, and you know, I think he probably did make the right decision. Let me tell you, what happened was there was a motion to dismiss this case, and he did not dismiss it. He let it go forward. So the merits of the case will be heard, I think it's set for January 25th. So that'll be before the May 15th primary. Second, the law was changed at the last minute by the legislature that allows everybody to vote.
And that postponed the lawsuit.
That's
the
correct.
Case.
So even though you have these words, reasonable impediment, whatever that means, that's a concerning thing, I think. But and last, it would, I think, confuse the voters somewhat to come in there if he did change it and say, no, you don't have to have ID, and people would get confused. Well, wait a minute, are you setting me up? I can't vote, and you're going to invalidate my vote if you don't look for an ID. Last but not least, I think proponents of the lawsuit should be encouraged because the Texas judge struck down a voter ID law act last year. So there's precedent out there for
On what
this.
basis?
It was because it was placed an undue burden on.
Well, that's the argument, Chris, that the NAACP and others have said is that it places a disproportionate disadvantage to minorities to vote. I'm not sure I understand completely how that's the case, because don't they have to have an ID when they go cash a check or go to a doctor's office or something like that?
Well, a disproportionate number of the people without IDs are people of color, are people in rest homes, or a lot of people in the poor. Right. So if there's a disproportionate number of those people that don't have an ID, those would be the people that it would disproportionately
But they don't
affect.
have to have that to go to a doctor or go to
it's a lot of people.
healthcare?
It's surprising how many people don't have an ID, and they still are able to function in society. The second point is that the other real basis of this whole thing is whether or not the courts are going to find that we've regressed. We used to have these things, and now we're making it harder to vote.
Based on Schroeder's decision, Becki, what verdict do you expect from the final verdict of the lawsuit?
I think that we will have a requirement that we have a photo ID in North Carolina.
And Phil, if that is the case, can we expect that this is going to get appealed to the Supreme Court? And if so, is there any reason to believe the Supreme Court might hear it?
If I knew that, I'd become a lawyer. No, I wouldn't. I think, I meant I couldn't pass the bar. I don't know, but I think it'll eventually go to the Supreme Court, but how they're going to rule, I have no idea.
One way or the other.
Yeah, I think both sides are dug in on it.
All right, after these messages, we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
Hey everyone, I'm Linda Loveland. If feeding your family safe, affordable foods is a priority for you, then join me in saying thanks to the North Carolina farmers who feed us.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Let's say thanks to the farmers who feed your family at #ThankNCFarmers. To learn more about the foods we eat and the farm families who feed us, visit feedthedialoguenc.com. And be sure to thank North Carolina farmers.
Clean transportation options can help you fuel what matters.
We're fueling what matters to us by converting our fleet of collection trucks over to compressed natural gas. It's a good, smart business decision, and having the air cleaner is something that benefits all the families that work with us.
We use biodiesel in our heavy equipment. We've got propane in a lot of our police cars, and we've really embraced the electric car. Join the city of Raleigh and fuel what matters.
To learn how you can fuel what matters, visit fuelwhatmatters.org.
Let's prepare our state for the future by supporting the Connect NC bond. The bond will fund smart investments in education, agriculture, state parks, our National Guard, and infrastructure projects, creating job opportunities, strengthening our workforce, and driving innovation. It's a timely investment and a smart one for North Carolina families. On March 15th, stand with Farm Bureau and vote for the Connect NC bond.
Last week we ran out of time and didn't have time for this segment, and I called heck about it all week long. So we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Becki Graham, we'll start with you.
Okay, North Carolina has some of the most restrictive occupational licensing requirements in the country. For example, there are 154 job categories that have to be licensed in North Carolina. In South Carolina, there are 49. In North Carolina, it requires 39 hours of training to become an emergency management technician, emergency medical technician. It takes 722 hours to become a barber. These are things that the General Assembly is looking at. The Program Evaluation Division did a study, and there's a committee that's looking at it this week, as a matter of fact.
Dennis Wicker, tell us something we don't know.
Well, of the 11 statewide races in the primary for the Democrats coming up March 15th, seven of them have one or more African Americans running for that office in the Democratic primary. When you consider that almost 40% of the Democratic primary vote are African American votes, you can see the repercussions all that could have. And if they're successful, what does this mean in the fall, and what kind of turnout would they have?
Phil Kirk, tell us something we don't know.
Teachers are not fleeing North Carolina on the bus loads, by the bus loads. In the last 4 years, 8,000 teachers have moved into North Carolina, 2,000 have moved out. So we've got 4 times as many coming in as we have going out.
Chris, we got 45 seconds.
Well, I'll give you a quick one. We talk a lot about teacher pay. I still think they deserve significantly more compensation, but we hear a lot from politicians. The principal is the most important person in the school. We need to give more authority to principals. I was interested at a recent NC Spin panel to find out that we rank 50th in the country in how much we pay principals out of the 50 states in the District of Columbia. 50th in the country, and we're giving them more responsibility and telling them when they need to do a better job. So we need to raise the pay of teachers and principals.
And in this next short session, you expect that's going to happen?
Well, I certainly hope so. If we're going to give principals responsibility, we need to compensate them.
All right. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback and read our weekly column. Be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And join us next week when we celebrate our 900th episode with more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.